we're going to ask some questions like you would in a book club to have to chat about the 1632 universe. And the other thing is that we would, I think it would be really cool to have 1632 book clubs, like at your local library and things like that, where you can go and discuss different 1632 books with your friends. But I could be completely wrong, so I'm interested in what you guys think of that idea. So to start with, how realistic do you guys think the 1632 universe is? Yes?
I would say at a 1 to 100, somewhere around 80 to 85-ish.
Okay, what do you think is not realistic enough?
I sometimes think that the progression from the technology is just a little, in my mind, it's a little too fast. Not a lot, but I think there's sometimes, okay, you know something can be done, but there's a big difference between knowing something can be done and doing it. Like, I know you need to smelt copper ore to make copper. I don't know how to mine it, I don't know the proper way to smelt it. Knowing that it can be done is one thing, but all those little details and going from a pre-industrial to industrial where it's just mass scale, sometimes that's where I think I've had the most, okay, someone goes too fast, and other things like it just doesn't go fast enough.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I would expect to be there just don't get it picked up as quickly.
Yeah.
Well, relating to that though, there's a lot of times when you're trying to produce something, there are maybe somewhat inefficient and expensive ways to make it, to get something done. And then there are more efficient, mass-produced ways to get it done. And I think in some cases here, it's plausible that things are being developed not really in a mass-produced way, you know, but there is justification for a limited number of certain things. And that the mass production will come later.
My sister-in-law, who's a mechanical engineer, talks about the 90-10 rule, which I always learned with the 80-20 rule. And the idea is that the first 80% of the advancement costs 10% of, or the first 80% of the advancement costs 20% of the money. The first, and the last 20% of the advancement costs 80% of the money. Basically, however much you're going to spend on advancing technology, the most is what gets you the least. When you're just starting out, to go from a paddle wheel to a crappy propeller, you're actually saving money. It's still more efficient than the paddle wheel, but you're actually saving money. To get to the kind of propeller that sends a nuclear submarine through the water at 30 knots without cavitation noise, that's millions and millions of dollars to design the sucker. But getting from nothing at all to a little bit is a lot easier than getting to chip manufacturers producing chip for your phone that costs a few dollars and have more power than the Colossus. So you're right about that, and the thing is, it goes both ways. Like you said, it goes both ways and some of the times the technology that people think is going to be really difficult isn't, and some of the times it's the technology that seems like it's going to be easily doable isn't. And a lot of different people have done a lot of research in it, and there has been a lot of argument about it.
And we do have a panel on technological issues in 1632 universe, so we can go into more detail in that panel. It will be where we discuss that kind of thing a bit more.
And the same thing's going to be true in the Alexander Inheritance universe and the Peterbilt universe, and in all the
the other ones. How realistic do other people think 1632 is?
I think that was pretty much it.
Yeah, but the only one with a real comment on it. what elements do you think make it more or less realistic? Is there any, and I know you just talked about that a little bit, anything you would change to make it more realistic beyond the technology issues? What do you think makes it more or less realistic?
I think bringing perhaps more elements of the everyday people into it. I really liked the one where they were teaching cooking. I thought that was hilarious, you know, you eat way too much meat in your diet.
She did that.
Yeah, so I mean, that was wonderful, but you know, you have all these people that have perhaps independent skills that aren't in gunsmithing or blacksmithing.
Well, like one of my stories I wrote was Clotheslined, was in Gazette 102, I believe.
Yeah, I haven't gotten that far.
And I got a book on clotheslines I picked up at the start. I'm like, someone wrote an entire book on clotheslines? Okay, I'm curious. And apparently the Romans had them and they disappeared for several centuries for whatever reason, and people were drying their clothing on the lawn in this time period and laying across bushes, which...
Really? In the
Yeah.
17th century, they were still doing that on the
That's what they were doing. And so I wrote a story, and there's a young lieutenant, and he makes everyone wash all of their clothing. And his sergeant comes in, and it's January, and he's like, "You're making them wash all of their clothing, and it's not dry, and it's cold outside. This is," and so he gets sent. You know, someone sends him on punishment to work with the laundresses, and he's like, "Where's your clotheslines?" And they're like, "What do you mean clotheslines?" And so they go and they find clotheslines, and in the end of the story, the quartermaster is like, the laundresses come in, and she's like, "Why are my clotheslines not being packed as essential equipment?" And he tries to explain to her how they are not essential equipment. And he eventually accepts the fact that they're essential equipment and then makes the adjustments to it, right? But it's like what you're saying, it's a very small thing, and that's one of the things, like, people look at our universe and they're like, how can I find something I can write? And that's the answer, is write regular people doing smaller things that aren't a huge canon impact, but they're real life. Like, everyone can get that. Like, you know, someone staring down the quartermaster going, "I don't think so. This is like," right? And we haven't all been in battle, right? And we have great military history things written in there. But I think that's a great point and a great way to get, like, anyone who's interested, anyone who watches this video, please write stories about small things and regular people and normal life. Yes.
And go into the clotheslines, unless you actually hung clothes out on a clothesline, you will probably do it wrong. When I was in college, I was hanging up clothes in the basement, and there was this girl, she was hanging up clothes, and I looked at her and I said, "Linda, your family has a clothes dryer." She said, "Well, yeah, what makes you say that?" I said, "Because you're doing it wrong." She says, "What do you mean I'm doing it wrong?" I said, "You're using 2 clothespins for each piece of clothes." She says, "Well, how else are you going to do it?" I said, "You put one on this one, and you have 2 pieces of clothes, you put the second one on 2. I said, "And that way you use less clothespins, and you, when you're taking them down, when you hold your basket, you take that pin off and it drops down. You take that pin off, but you don't know it unless you've actually done it." It's like every time I see a painting of a well house with a well bucket, it's always wrong. You know why it's wrong?
I never had a well house.
Because the bail is attached to the top of the bucket. And if you have ever tried to lower a bucket like that into a cistern or someplace to get water, you have no idea how hard it would be to get the stupid thing to tip over. A well bucket has a bail attached in the middle of the bucket, and it's a little bit longer. So when it comes down, it naturally tips over, fills up with water, and you pull it up. But
So if you're a writer, write the story.
Little techniques like that in not now used technology are just lost.
Exactly, yes. And that is a good way to add more realism, is to add those little details and all of that kind of stuff. And yes?
One of the things I like is that the politics is messy.
Yeah.
It's not this steamroll to this glorious future, there's setbacks, there's people being people. You know, the motivations that people have, good, better, and different, all play out.
And I don't know, I think Eric did a pretty good job on that part. Because you've got the Oxenstierna and going back against and the realization that Mike is going to lose the election, that basically there's been too much change and people aren't reacting to it well. I think you did a pretty good job, at least so far as you can do a good job in terms of a single book. I think you did a pretty decent job, probably better than we did in Russia.
So 1632, the original novel, was published in 2000, so it was written actually largely in 1999, so it's been a quarter century going. Over 50 novels, 105 magazine issues, with the 107th about to come out in just a few weeks, because there's 102 in the Gazette, and the 5th one is about to come out in the new magazine, 1632 and Beyond. Multiple anthologies, all in the 1632 verse, written by about 200 authors over 25 years. When it was first written, in 2000, everything was contemporary. 25 years later, the technology, the pop culture, all kinds of other things have changed. What kind of challenges do you think this presents to the writers and to the readers? And how do you think that might change in 50 years, when we hit 50 years, and in 25 more years when we're at 50 years? Casper?
We still won't have microprocessors, so everyone doing everything now will become accustomed to that. And since it was written in 2000, still the internet wasn't as obsessive, compulsive as it is now.
Amazon was a small company,
Correct.
relatively.
So people still had to be, and great thing about the universe is it's placed in an area where they had to be self-sufficient, generally. So it makes sense that you have all these people with all of these weird, quirky hobbies still that typically we don't have now. We don't have the same weird, quirky hobbies.
Well, I know some weird, quirky people.
Yeah.
As a portion of the population, it's smaller than it would have been
Yeah.
20 years ago.
I was going to say that you probably need to be careful about slang and making sure that it's not post-2000.
Yeah. It's really kind of hard. You'd be amazed how many story things where you'll be like, oh, they could have known, would they have known this song? You know, was this movie released? Was this character like anything Marvel Universe, right? Like, one of the things we're doing a panel on tomorrow is cosplay in alternate history, because I really think there should be cosplay. So, what I'm wearing right now, I have, this is a split skirt that I made.
Yeah, you
because
need to
that's
go
what they wear.
around in front.
Split skirt. But I took some time thinking about it, and I have this Totoro shirt, which is the exact right colors to go with it, and I was like, would they have had that in 2000? And I had to think about it, and Totoro was definitely released in Japan before 2000. It may or may not have been here. They could have had it. I wouldn't put it in a story that someone had anything Totoro, but for cosplay, the story rules are a little looser, right? But you have to really go back and think on some of these things. Would they have had that, right? Like when I was putting this together, they would have worn sneakers, but mine probably look long for what they would have worn in 2000. And when we get 25 years further out, I mean, you can always go get some Chucks, because Chucks are probably still gonna be there in another 25 years. But you start having to look at things a little differently, and like our things you don't think about, like the style on your sneakers, right? Starts to enter into things.
Shoes that old.
I have shoes that are that old too. But yeah, there's definitely a component of things you wouldn't expect to changing. Yes?
Well, also to elaborate on that a little is, the further we get away from 2000, the future aren't gonna understand what it means to not have a cell phone.
Right.
Yeah,
You know, I didn't get a cell phone until 2008, because I needed one for work. And that's the only reason I got one. Now, almost everybody above the age of 10.
I think you're a little high on that age.
Yeah.
Well, I am going to say something here, because Bjorn and I were talking just this afternoon, that we really are to the point now in the 1632 series, that we are writing two sets of history that our younger fans, as they come in, have to learn. One in the 1630s and one for the year 2000. And it is getting more and more difficult to explain to aspiring young writers what was and was not common in the year 2000.
And well, we think about the big thing that happened in 2001, that they would have no understanding. Oh, you take your shoes off going through the airport? That security awareness,
yeah.
9/11, they would have no idea for it.
And it's a very different interaction with the Ottoman nations, with the Muslim nations. And because no matter what your politics are, if you have an entire town from 2002 instead of 2000, there is going to be a portion of them that will have a different reaction just based on that, post 911. And thank you for your comment, Virginia. Yes?
You will also have your younger people there who started out as Grantville people, and maybe let's postulate there's a Grantville family that was not intermarried and stayed insular in a way. But they will have more and more trouble. Well, for instance, all those brain dead people down at the 250 Club are going to have more and more trouble explaining what was, because the younger people will not have less and less connection with it.
Yeah. And I had two books that were published through Ring of Fire Press, and they're going to be coming out through Bain as they release the Nest books, and they're releasing Virginia's books next. Mine will be released at some point. And I have a third book I wrote that will be released called Red Shield. And Red Shield deals with the Red Cross, which is renamed Red Shield, and Scouts, which is combined Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. And they're having to deal with changes in how, like, the Scouts teach you how to build a fire, right? And the downtimers are like, you're teaching teenagers how to build a fire, right? And at the same time,
Are they really that slow?
you know, and at the same time, like, the uptimer kids are looking at it and going, well, you guys have to be told and taught to wash your hands after you poop. So, and then, and so they're going back and forth. The downtimers are kind of like, well, you can't see those, you can see a fire. But there's very much of that, of a push and pull between what is understood and known by the downtimers and what is known and understood by the uptimers. And and they put a deadline in the scouting using the uptime requirements of just a few years, because they're like, by the time we've been here 4 years or so, all of our kids have to just, like, from life, know how to build a fire and do these other things. So it's showing an expectation of what we're learning and what we're expecting our kids is changing over time. And our knowledge base is changing. So, yeah, but they're definitely going to still be strong on sanitation techniques in the scouting.
First aid.
Yeah, first aid for sure. So, Eric Flint started this, and what do you think reflects his life and beliefs in this novel and this universe? Yep.
I would say the optimism that things can be changed for the better.
Yes, there's that for sure.
I'm a Trotskyist, and so my knowledge of Eric Flint's background with the Socialist Workers' Party, it's been amusing to me in both the 1632 universe and in the Trail of Glory universe seeing stuff that I'm like, oh, that's Socialist Workers' Party stuff. So in the 1632 universe, it's the workerism, which my old comrades in the Freedom Socialist Party, we used to joke about how you go to a Socialist Workers' Party event and everyone is dressed in flannel shirts, jeans, it's like prolier than thou, as I used to call it. And then in the 1812 Trail of Glory universe, it's sort of Eric Flint's take on the black nationalism that George Brightman and the Socialist Workers' Party had been moving towards and reconciling themselves with. So those are the two areas where I can see sort of Eric's background, politically speaking, in both of those universes. And again, how many people would pick up on that? My impression of the 1632 readership is that it's a lot more conservative folks than, Trotskyists reading it, but that was, it was like, oh, cool, I recognize where that's coming from.
Well, conservative, conservative, they may not be conservative, they're just not that type of liberal minded because it's not their experience.
Yeah.
Most of the readers are going to be more intellectual nerdy types.
Yep.
Oh, and that wasn't meant as a critique, by the way. I
No,
subscribe to.
the critique is a neutral term.
Yeah.
I know Eric had a sense of humor. He used to call himself Bain's token liberal.
Yeah.
Well, I was actually thinking that it would be interesting, like in interactions between uptimers and downtimers, that uptimers who consider themselves conservatives would be surprised to find that they look liberal.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of the work.
Underwood and Simpson, you get that in the very first book.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he did have a sense of humor because it just tickles me that the Freedom Marches are McDonald's.
Question, in the very first book,
Correspondence, that's a hoot.
in the very first book, McDonald's is actually mentioned, but after that, it's just referred to as Freedom Marches. Is there some legal issue there?
No, they changed the name they go back in time in in April of 2000 to May of 1631, and by September of 31, it's the Freedom Marches. So it's just such a tiny sliver of time, and it's closed down. So there is a story, the Freedom Marches story in issue 100 that refers to it as McDonald's, and it talks about the McDonald's manager and, whatever, and it explains it explains how it becomes the Freedom Marches.
Oh, I thought maybe McDonald's said, you can't say that.
No.
No, although I will say that personal point of view, we're trying to remove some of the, move away from some of those things like moving from Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts to Pioneer Scouts, which is a combined group, and
Pioneer Scout.
yes, but it's explicitly because of the American pioneers, but they come to the name because they have a group of names, and they're in the Willard Hotel, and Willard Carson is a complete jerk. No one likes Willard. He walks by, he hears them saying, what are we going to call the youngins, pioneers? And he's like, what are you, communists? And they're all like, Willard hates it. If we tell Willard hates it, everyone's going to agree on it, and that makes our life easier. So Pioneer Scouts, guys? Okay, let's have a burger. Right? So that's kind of where it comes from, is just annoying the jerk. Yes?
And I think it's also not just that Eric was an optimist, it's, you're going to have setbacks. It's not a steamroller, you go from success to success. It's okay, we succeed here, we have a fallback there, a catastrophe somewhere else. It's like the real world in that life happens.
Yeah. And you can be an optimist without,
Being starry-eyed and rose-colored glasses. Eric used to say that being a socialist worker was a lot like being a magazine salesman. Basically, that what you were doing as a socialist worker is you were walking around knocking on people's doors and trying to get them to buy a periodical. This is what it was. I mean, that's how radical the radicals were.
Hell, we did bake sales.
all right, I would see Melissa Maley doing a bake sale, but
I can't.
but she wouldn't be doing the baking, she'd be running.
No.
And that was one of those great scenes when she and Quentin Underwood, agreed. They laughed about a king. We're gonna have a king, and here's the leader of the right-wing sort of Granvillers and the left-wing Granvillers, and they can both agree that having a king is
Not a
like
good-
very anti-American.
Okay, so, in the universe, how do you think books and libraries in Granville within the universe contribute to both the plot and the 1632 verse?
They're essential.
Yeah.
Oh, big deal.
They're national security items, but
Samson!
they're not, they're not controlled.
Yeah.
The importance is, this is for national security, but we want to disseminate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because change is better for us, or else we're just gonna get absorbed and we're gonna get crushed by numbers. So this is our strength, play to your strength.
Yes.
Has it ever been sort of laid out what books are being held back?
There are very few, but Bjorn, you,
There are initially 4 books that are held back. 2 of them are on warship design. 2 of them are on modern firearms. Later on, a 5th book on cryptography is put in the restricted shelf. And it's pretty clear from the context, although it's never stated explicitly, that it's the Cryptonomicon. That it's the book Cryptonomicon.
Okay.
But there's only 5. I could have missed one, but there certainly are more than 6.
Okay.
And that was at the beginning.
and I think that's, and personally, I think that's 6 too many.
1636, 1637, they have done enough shipbuilding that there was no point in keeping those books back.
You couldn't keep the secret, you're building the ships in an open slipway, no matter how well you build. Someone's going to talk or,
So that was at the beginning. The more they put out, they released the books.
And that could probably be a story in itself.
Yeah, actually, that could be a very good story in itself, as somebody saying, look, this book no longer needs to be.
I look forward to reading it from you, Gorg.
We should call it the classification engine. Yes.
So, related to that, Granville, how much power do you think the Granville and its residents have to change the world? And obviously, those books are one of the biggest levers of power that they have, even more than any tools or any equipment, which is why the Crow at Raid targeted the library.
That's a powerful factor by itself, but they've also had to very quickly grasp the politics and make
Yeah.
alliances, or they would not survive. So there's a political dimension that requires smart leadership for them to
Yeah.
be in a position where they can continue to influence the world.
I think their power to change the world will be extreme, but their ability to change the world the way they want to wouldn't be. But you just have to look at America and its attempts.
Yeah.
So it's like, unintended consequences kind of thing.
That's what.
They have influence as opposed to power.
That's fair. That's fair.
We've seen how Bernie Zappi, just one uptimer, has had such a huge impact. Oh, it's one of my favorite storylines. Has had such a huge impact all by himself in Russia. But now we're also seeing in the Red Sun series, is it John Deakins? By Deakins?
Yes.
Yeah. How the influence of the uptimers on a single downtimer is now conceivably having a huge impact on the history of Native America, and how much that can change. So it's still, especially for the areas that haven't been directly impacted by the town as a whole, one uptimer or a downtimer influenced by uptimers can have a huge amount of influence. It'll be interesting to see how India, Japan, and China, how those storylines continue.
And the other thing is their medical innovations have so much impact. One Leahy Hospital, the novel I've just finished, The Bane Red Shield, that hasn't been published yet. One of the key things I'm doing in there is I create an entire additional wing next door it's a triangular shape, so there's a women's wing, a children's wing, and then the third wing has the Red Shield and a NICU in it.
A what?
NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. And the children's wing has a PICU, a pediatric intensive care unit. So they're taking care of children that would otherwise die. And they create incubators, steam-powered incubators. And they're based on real-world incubators that were around in the 1900 to 1930 time period. And one of the women, Garnet Szymanski, I believe, her mom was actually saved by the man with these incubators, so she has more knowledge than the average person would. And that's how they come back. And it brings in real world tech and real world knowledge. And they're able to build these incubators and they spread them from there, saving all these lives that would otherwise have been wasted. But they also have like these really fancy steam-powered ones, and then there's like, here's 2 other versions you can build that are cheaper and easier for you to use, so you can do them like with your own tech. So in real life, they would put babies in like a brick in with an infant to keep it warmer. And so there's some variations on that, where you can use things that are just like normal household pots and pans, so you're not buying something new, you're just using a pot.
As I don't remember the story, Dr. What's his name, but the deer and quids in the oven.
Actually, I remember that in my family, my Uncle Bull was very much premature. He was like 2 pounds. And they literally did put him in the oven. For,
No, this is true. My grandfather was born in 1864, and he had a cousin, a woman who everybody called Tiny. And when I was the child, I could not understand why Grandpa's cousin Tiny would have been called Tiny, because she was a large and impressive woman. And I asked, and I was told that she was born very prematurely, and they put her in a padded wooden shoebox on the open door of a wood stove. And that was where she basically stayed for the first 3 months of her life. But that was known technology long in the past.
Yeah, so they're helping them do some like tweaking to their known technology and make it better and easier for them. And some of the to be clear, are downtimers. Like all of this is not being done by uptimers. All of this can't be done by uptimers. That's, you have something in mind.
One of the greater long-term impacts, I think, will be on the population of Europe. It'll be a bigger population than it was in our time. And will that lead to, how much emigration will that cause? Or healthier, lower class folks, working class folks, are we going to see an age of revolution a lot sooner? Because there's not going to be that pressure of poverty and sickness and illness pushing people to all immigrate to other parts of the world. You know, and nor will there be so much fewer Native Americans, knock on wood, that, you know, won't seem to be an empty wilderness that people can just move.
Bernie Zeppian is getting them Gatorade and Pedialyte made such a huge difference in the world. Their population, thousands of people alive in Russia just because of that. You were to...
Yeah, another thing that we see all these books, and you know, everybody goes down to see where they are in those books. You know, am I in that encyclopedia, etc.
Right.
But it's only going to be a couple years, and all that's going to be changed, so it doesn't matter. You know, really, what is the impact? Well, you see that in England with the Stuart family.
Right.
Just, you know, so I think that's going to be a fascinating thing to watch that roll out.
Well, Jody Lynn Knight has a book coming out in Bjorn. Is it September or October? Do you remember? I think October.
October.
The Weaver's Tale from Jody Lynn Knight is set in England, and that's coming out this fall from Bain.
I think it's easy to underestimate their impact, especially with medicine, that before World War II, majority of the casualties were sickness, disease, environmental, and that applied to everybody. The number of people who died to, okay, I think it was one of Coolidge's sons, president, died to a simple blister that got infected in the 20s. Pre-sulfa drugs, pre-penicillin, introducing those, you suddenly will have, the population is going to increase at least the first generation of two, because more children will survive. It's, which does give you population pressures, which you might say it would be nice they don't move to the Americas, but where do they move then?
Although one thing is they have lost a lot of population to war right before this time period, so that will.
Sure.
The other thing is, the wealthier you are, the fewer children you have.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's common enough. So, yeah, you're going to get a population bump, but that population bump is going to go up and then it's going to stabilize. And so.
The one thing also to keep in mind is that Europe still had a lot of space, not so much in Western Europe, but when you went farther east. If you study, for example, emigration from the Duchy of Württemberg in Germany, about a third of the immigrants went off to North America. About a third went down into what is now southwestern Ukraine, then Austrian Galicia. About a third went up into what was in the 18th century West Prussia. It was still Poland in this time period. But there were still lands to open and give away, homesteaders in Eastern Europe. There's a lot of space in Eastern Europe compared to Western Europe. This is something a lot of people don't internalize.
Yeah, but that land is still owned by natives of that area. The population is much lower, but the population was also lower in the Americas.
But it could be brought in, the people could be brought in by the people who control the land.
Yeah.
That's
And a
what
lot of this
Germans
land in southeastern Europe was controlled by the Habsburgs.
Yeah.
Who could say basically,
Yeah.
we're going to allot this. Because technically it wasn't all even allotted, it was still in royal hands.
Yeah, there's that.
Okay, what about your grandparents' life, going back to people who used to have skills that they don't now? Your grandparents' life in childhood, do you think could have prepared them to live in the 1632 verse? And the same about your parents or yourself and your family? What kinds of skills do you think were there?
Oh, and my grandfather was a handyman.
Yeah.
I think he'd be very useful.
Yeah.
My great-grandpa he wallpapered a room with soup can labels. We're not really sure why he did this, but he did. And so that's why in Mrs. Flannery's Flowers, there's a scene where her dad ran a general store and he wallpapered a room with soup can labels that fell off their cans. Exactly.
One of my grandfathers worked with Westinghouse doing the original electric lines and transformers. I'm relatively lucky he was born in the 1880s. So, but probably would have done okay being born that early. My other grandparents, born in the 1910s, I'd say they have a good chunk of the skills because before electricity became common, they still had to know how to use wood stoves, coal stoves. Anybody who has grandparents who were born pre-World War I probably would do okay.
Although they were awful old by the time you hit 2000 and they went back.
Yeah.
Ma'am? Did you have something?
Me?
Yeah, I thought you had.
There were parts of Delaware, water gap area in Pennsylvania that did not get electricity until after World War II. Because I was sent to spend summers in a little, not really farm there, but the woman who owned the farm, she had kerosene lamps and a kerosene stove and everything pumped. we children were not allowed to go near those labs. It was a very old building. And the summer when I was 12, the kerosene stand for our stove broke down. She was cooking quite neatly on an old, a cold wood-burning range. And that's the year that the old Dutch farmer came to her and said, Miss Hay, she was a city girl from New York originally, that fellow across the valley, he's getting his electricity put in, and you've been here longer than he has. And when I left, they were running the lines up to them, up and out to her place. So, and they could go down south, or down in Appalachia, and places like that. Those skills are still known down there.
Basically, a lot of the people who went back with Granville were older than I am. The house grew up in got electricity the year before I was born. We got running water in 1963, by which time I had graduated from college and moved away. Basically, rural America was a generation and a half at least behind in technology, even small towns, because there was just so much space to cover with the lines and the pipes, and all of that. So basically,
Connect the politics and the money for all of that as well, in certain areas.
as also early on, and I've been in on the discussions for a long time, early on, there were all these people coming into the discussion on the 1632 Tech Forum saying, oh, wonderful, we're absolutely sure that the Grantvillers will have copies of the Firefox books and they can teach the downtowners all these wonderful things. To which I said, who do you think brought these techniques to America? Do you think they invented them all on the ship on the way?
Okay, Virginia, there's a few men here to, and then I think we're supposed to end around 10 up, so.
So the question was, would grandparents survive in that interview? My grandfather was a farmer. Family story goes that he took the crops to town to sell one fall, and then he paid all the bills. And he had a nickel left over. And on the way home, he saw this guy walking along the side of the road, because this is during the Depression. And he gave him a ride and he gave him the nickel. And my grandmother goes, Stonewall, why did you do that? That was the only hard cash we had. He said, Mammy, we have food in the pantry in the root cellar that will take us for a year. He says, we have wood carved up that will keep us warm the whole winter. We have wool carved out for blankets and warm clothes. He says, we have everything we need. That man had nothing. See, they would have done fine. I mean, unlike some of their neighbors, they actually grew things like field pumpkins and squashes, edible squashes, instead of just cash crops. And they put up what they needed, and they put a big pile out by the side of the road, and people came by and just picked them up. My grandmother got married when she was 15, but she learned how to graft. She had an apple tree with 5 different kinds of apples on it. Now, you can buy them now, but she made it herself. Yeah, they would have done fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed.
Yeah.
Last comment?
I was gonna mention sewing. You know, Woolworths in the 60s still had sewing patterns that my mom could buy and stuff like that.
Even in 2000, yeah.
You know, by 1980, were they still selling those?
Yeah. They're still selling at Walmart.
They're still sold today.
Are they still at Walmart?
Yeah.
Okay, not every Walmart, but yes, they do sell them at Walmart. And one of the things I put in though was in 1920s and 30s, there was a large number of correspondence courses in sewing and cooking and related fields. And so I have, Irene Flannery in particular has a bunch of books on sewing. And they're the old school ones, and it's like you measure from here to here, and that's this measurement, and then this measurement, and this measurement, and it diagrams, and you make it to fit yourself.
But if you go back to.
So I was Virginia.
And read the Tudor tailor, that's how the tailors did it then.
Yes, and okay, so we have other books coming in, but I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think in general about the idea of a 1632 book club?
I love that.
Yeah, online, or is
There is actually one online on bookclubs.com, I believe. I will have to check and confirm what it is. I wrote it down, and I didn't bring what I wrote down with me. But I started the 1632 book club on an online website. And if you look on blog.1632.com, blog.1632magazine.com, there's a list, and when I printed it out, it's 3 pages of questions you can use for your own book club for 1632 if you want to do one through your magazine, through your local library or somewhere. But yes, there is a 1632 online book club now. I just created it, so there's not a ton of information there yet, but I'll work on it more next week. So thank you all. I had fun.
And I told myself I would do Eric, because I have a lot